Recording. So I'm Kara Cookson. I'm with the Maine Office of the Attorney General, and I coordinate the Victim Witness Advocate program. And you all are here today as part of our foundational training service or series that we've been working on with MCEDV and MICASA. And today we are joined by a fabulous team from Maine Legal Services for the Elderly. We have Hillary Fernald, Ben Jenkins, and Ren Saunders. Ren is representing clients in Cumberland and Saginaw counties, and Hillary works with clients in Aroostook, Hancock, and Washington. Ben is the litigation director at LSC, and he oversees the work of staff attorneys in all 16 Maine counties. We're so grateful to have you here today to talk about both the work of your organization and how we can partner with you to better serve elders and the aging population in Maine. Also to hear your tips on how to serve this group of people based on your experience. So really grateful to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great, really happy to be here, Kara. And so my name is Ben Jenkins. I work at Legal Services for the Elderly. I'm going to talk a little bit about what LSC does, and then have Ren and Hillary take over to talk about their work with clients. If anyone's interested in turning their camera on, it would be great so I can see people's faces. That's super helpful. And I'm going to do a couple slides, but they won't take long, and then we'll get the conversation going. So if anybody has questions at any point, just jump in. We'd rather have a conversation than just us talking at you. So let me show you a couple of slides. So LSE represents Mainers who are 60 and older, and you can see the qualifications. It's roughly or generally people who are socially and economically needy and need help to obtain or protect their basic needs. We don't do criminal law. We work in civil cases only, and our clients don't pay us. It's a free service. We have staff attorneys who represent clients in all 16 counties, like Cara mentioned, and we show up in courts, district court, superior court, occasionally the law court, once in a while federal court, lots of administrative proceedings all over the state. So we're litigators. So that means we're going in and advocating on behalf of our clients. And many times our clients have been a victim of a crime, or there's a criminal investigation, and we will coordinate in one way or another with law enforcement and or the district attorney's office or the U.S. attorney's office, depending on who's handling the criminal matter, and try to make sure that our civil process is coordinated with what's going on in the criminal matter as well. So one thing I want to talk about is what's going on in Maine with our population. So this is a big picture, what Maine's population looked like and what the US population looked like by age back in 1970. You see they're almost exactly the same, with older residents at the top, younger at the bottom, almost exactly the same shape. And then you look at what was going on in 2014, you can see that Maine has this really unique shape. As you know, Maine has the oldest population or second oldest population in the country. And you can see why that's the case. We have lots of people who are 50 and older and who are aging up on this graph, with fewer and fewer younger people on the bottom. So we have a very different shape to our population demographics than the rest of the country. And this matters a lot because if you don't have younger people at the bottom of this chart, then you don't have people who can provide services or other assistance to the people at the top of the chart who need that help. And that's a situation we see very often in our helping our clients, is that they are fending for themselves and are not receiving the help that they need. So you can see the comparison here, the change. And this is through 2014. These trends have totally continued through the 2020 census. And we're in looking at that quickly, this is just more exaggerated now than it was. So what does this mean? It means you're all going to have lots more clients who are 60 and older or 50 and older. Like that's just because they're a much, much higher percentage of the of Maine's population. So, and here's the other reason you're getting a lot more clients. People over 50 control 80% of the wealth in the US. So our clients are targeted for crimes, especially financial crimes, for the reason that they often control more assets than people in other age groups. This often is in the form of owning real estate or owning a home or other things, but there's a reason that older people get targeted. We have an estimate that there's 12,000 Maine seniors who suffer from abuse each year. It's really common to discover that a client who maybe presents with having been financially exploited, let's say, has actually suffered from other types of abuse as well, and maybe just isn't comfortable talking about those other the other things that have happened to them. So as when you're forming a relationship with a client and they're giving you a portion of the story, there's likely much more there. And I think in our experience, we think it's most likely that it's that there are other forms of abuse. And then most folks don't report this. So Ren and Hillary will talk a bit more about how to communicate effectively with older clients and how to develop a relationship of confidence with them. But we know that most of these crimes are not reported. So you can start to see this is happening all over the state. I think at this point, 2/3 of the state would be dark purple as far as what the median age is by county. So depending on where you work, most of the people you'd be working with quite likely will be 50 or 60 and older. And that's just important to recognize as you move forward. That's why thinking about how to effectively work with older Mainers is really important, because it's going to be quite likely the majority of clients at some point in the next 10 years. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and see. I guess I'll start out. I don't know if anybody has any questions based on those numbers. There are things that just want to present as background because it is a really significant part of our work, knowing what's happening and how many more seniors there are in Maine now than even just 10 or 15 years ago. So jump in if folks have questions. Otherwise, I'll talk a little bit about what we do, and then I'm going to turn things over to Ren and Hillary. So yeah, so we help clients in different types of legal proceedings. And I'm not going to be able to tell you all of them, but I'll tell you some of them. We represent clients in protection from abuse and harassment matters. We help clients in eviction defense matters. We sometimes help clients with affirmative evictions when they have someone in their house who presents a safety risk. We help with foreclosure defense. We work on certain types of benefit appeals, including Social Security overpayment cases and other types of Maine benefit denials. We work on discharge cases from assisted living and nursing homes. And what am I missing, Ren and Hillary?
Home care appeals, financial exploitation cases.
Yep. Excellent. And the financial exploitation cases are often our most complex litigation, which involve full litigation for 18 months or more, where we're seeking to often get someone's home that they've deeded away, to recover their home or other assets that have been taken from them, and which we think amounts to financial exploitation. So the way this works is if you have a client who's a Maine resident, that just means lives in Maine, and as their primary residency, and then is 60 and older, you end up, you can call our helpline. We can share that. I'll share that 1-800 number with you in the chat. You can call with a client to get them connected to the helpline, and the helpline will do a quick intake and then get them in the queue to have an attorney call them back and talk to them about their legal problem. We really encourage people, if you think you're working with someone that could benefit from our help, to call with them to get them in connected with our services. And there's no income requirement on behalf of the clients. We work with some clients who have lots of resources, but who are very socially needy. Most of our clients, to be honest, are poor, but many that isn't a requirement from our funding. And it's a little different than, for instance, Pine Tree, who does have income limitations. And like I said, there's no charge for the services. If someone calls us and needs a service that we don't provide, so let's say someone needs a divorce and there's also protection from abuse hearing, we would help them with the PFA and then work to give them a referral to a low fee or no fee attorney who could handle the divorce, for instance. So even if we don't handle a certain type of civil matter, we have a panel of attorneys, private attorneys, who will accept referrals from us. So it's still worth connecting a client to us if we can potentially help them get connected to an attorney who can help them with their legal problem. So that's how cases come in. And many of our cases stay right at the helpline. I think we get 10 to 12,000 calls a year. And most of those calls just stay in the helpline, and people are receiving advice or very limited services from the helpline dealing with, let's say, debt harassment from debt collectors or other types of issues that the helpline can help them do themselves. A really small subset of those cases get sent out to people like Ren and Hillary, and that's for extended representation. And those are the cases that we talked about before. And so most of our work these days is done remotely because of the way that the courts are structured. But once we continue to get back to post-pandemic life, whatever that looks like, we do have the ability to go to any court in the state and represent clients there, which is a really great part of our work, is that we really focus on trying to find clients who need help, who live in remote areas and who are being underserved. So we're not sure when courts will reopen that way and when we'll be connected to being there in person. We do go in person sometimes these days, but that is our normal business model, is to be in person in court with the client, no matter where that case might be. So with all of that, I think I'll pause again to see if there's any questions. I'm looking over here. People are being harassed online. Yeah, so maybe Hillary, why don't you just talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend if we knew who it was. If they were someone local, there would be the potential of maybe seeking a protection from harassment. You would probably need either like an actual criminal offense, stalking or something, or at least 3 incidents and threats. But we haven't done one for online harassment, a protection from harassment case. So that would be an interesting kind of first. But if it wasn't someone identifiable and local, then we wouldn't be able to proceed against them in the local court. So we likely wouldn't be able to do anything to assist. Yeah, that's the short answer.
The reason for my question was because I've personally met several older adults who say their computer was locked with spyware and they were told they had to pay an amount to get their computer back. I mean, we've all seen that, and we all know to find another way around that. I know many people who have paid that amount, especially when there were threats such as, you know, we have found child porn on your computer and it needs to be erased. That's the way some of them work. So I just wondered if there was any option for someone who was harassed in that way and coerced into sending money for services that didn't exist.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one, and then maybe you can fill in, Hillary or Ren. But I would say that's more than harassment. That sounds like financial exploitation. And
It's ransomware.
And so
Yes.
Right. And so what we would look at is whether or not we can identify who did the harassing and the exploitation. If it's someone within the state of Maine that we can identify, then we would be able to pursue civil action if we thought that was appropriate to recover the money. We'd also be able to coordinate with law enforcement to try to pursue that individual. Unfortunately, most of the online exploitation, and I hear people call this like online like scams, but that just feels kind of like it makes the act seem kind of inconsequential when in fact it's a billion-dollar industry that preys on people's vulnerabilities. So that online exploitation, when it occurs outside of the state of Maine, which is most of the time, that triggers federal jurisdiction because of the communications and money crossing state lines. And we work with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Maine and the FBI to try to pursue those cases. they're really hard to get great results because most of the time there's no way to, by the time the FBI investigates, the exploiter has moved on to a new alias and a new IP address, and it's really difficult. But they do investigate, and we have had some luck in pursuing different forms of online exploitation. There's, the romance scams. There's the situations where we get lots where people are, they're really specific. They're like, I'm trapped on an oil rig and need to get money to, get healthcare and all these things. And and the FBI is able to pursue some of those cases and actually has extradition powers in certain countries to actually pursue these criminally. But to be really upfront with you, if it's not somebody in Maine doing the exploiting, it's really hard to get much of a recovery, even when the FBI gets involved.
Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, well, that's like the most exciting stuff we talk about. So I'm hoping that triggers some more questions. Ren and Hillary, do you want to start to talk a little bit about your work with clients and how pointers that you see for effectively working with someone who, is 60 and older?
Sure. I'll just maybe start with kind of the framework I think about when working with this particular demographic. I think, unfortunately, a similar thing happens to children that happens to the elderly, in that there's a tendency for folks to speak down, not listen, talk around, talk about folks when they become elderly. And I've had many conversations with clients where they have opened up to me about their feeling invisible, insignificant, that they're not heard, people don't listen to them. And so when I'm working with my clients, I really try to make a huge effort to, in the initial phone calls with them, to really listen and take the time to hear what they're saying, resist the temptation to interrupt or try to immediately solve the problem or comment even. It's so important for them to be able to tell their story and be heard and really know that you're listening. People pick up on when folks aren't listening to them. They really pick up on that, and having that kind of approach, especially in the early conversations when you're connecting with clients or folks that you're working with, is so important, because if you take that time to have an easy and relaxed conversation with them where they do get to share their story, where you might talk about things that aren't necessarily particularly relevant to whatever issue you're helping them with, allow the conversation to kind of meander a little bit, allowing for those kinds of things really helps to establish a sense of trust between myself and my clients. And what that also does is, because the client feels heard, I find that when there are times when I need to speak to them in the future about things, and we may need to keep the conversation really narrow and get certain things done, that there is a place for that to happen, because they know that I've already heard them. We've established this relationship of trust. And it saves time in future conversations, having laid that groundwork. It also relieves anxiety, knowing that they've been heard. I find that it can reduce the numbers of calls, of just anxious calls from clients. Hey, I'm here, or whatever, whatever it is, the worried calls and things, that if they know that they're in good hands and you've established that relationship, then there's less of that anxiety, and the relationship continuing forward, and the work, I think, tends to be more effective. The other thing too, especially in these early conversations when I'm talking with clients and they're telling their story and we're trying to get information, and perhaps they have some memory issues, they might have some early stage dementia, or maybe they just have some memory difficulty because of anxiety about the situation, or they've been through some sort of trauma. Allowing them the permission to not remember and say, you don't need to remember everything right now. We can talk later. Or I let them know that after the conversation, if there are things that they think of, they can call and leave a voice message for me with that item. I said, even that now, thankfully, my phone doesn't ring in the middle of the night. It's, it just goes to a voicemail. So I tell them that they can call me at any time and leave a voice message for me. And I only occasionally have clients take me up on that offer, but it really gives them a sense of, it reduces anxiety about the situation. Okay, I don't have to remember everything. If I do remember something, I can call when I remember it and get that information out, and it'll be heard. So those are a couple of things that I try to do early on in my relationship with my clients, and it really is so important for them to feel heard and respected, and not regarded as unable or incapable, regardless of what their particular limitations are. So those are some of my kind of foundational things. And then I wanted to just pop in one thing about hearing loss, and then I'll hand it over to Hillary to talk for a little bit. Sometimes hearing loss, when our clients are experiencing hearing difficulties, they don't always communicate that to us. And it can often present as where you would question whether or not the person might have some form of dementia or cognitive disability, because you're asking questions, they're smiling, looking engaged, and then answering with words that don't make sense with what you've asked. They're not answering the question that you've asked. And I had a client who I needed to do a power of attorney with. And so I met with her in person to do an assessment to see whether or not she had the capacity to name an agent. And so, and she was very ill, and it was a really necessary document for her to have in place. And I was really concerned after my first meeting with her about whether or not she had capacity, but she looked engaged, but she was not answering coherently. And thankfully, I had a conversation with one of her home health aides, and the home health aide said, some people are saying that she's got dementia, but I'm not so sure because she has some hearing problems. And so I scheduled another meeting with her and had a pocket talker, their headphones that I put on the client, and it's got a speaker basically that I speak into that blasts my speech into her ears. And all of a sudden, her eyes just lit up with excitement because she could hear what I was saying. And we had a really wonderful conversation, and she was clear as could be. There is zero indication of any kind of cognitive impairment. And so that was a remarkable learning experience for me early in this job at LSE, to realize that I've got to always be keeping an eye out for that sort of thing, because I could have determined that she didn't have capacity to do this power of attorney, or if it were some other type of case where she would need to testify in court, or where the level of capacity would even need to be higher to fulfill the task, she could have missed out on either necessary representation or this power of attorney document, and just having that assistive hearing device made all the difference. So now I'll pass this on to Hillary, unless anybody has any questions.
No, okay. Well, you guys have covered a lot. I guess I'll just say a couple other things about just the way we work with clients. I think we work really hard to do kind of a holistic all-around approach, and we do so many different types of cases that we are able to spot when someone has another issue that might come up in a case. So we might be working on a protection order case, and someone mentions that they have money being taken out of their Social Security every month, and then we would maybe assist them with an overpayment case, or we're familiar with the various other types of benefits. So I will refer people to fuel assistance or SNAP benefits, things like that. So I think it's helpful that we do such a wide range of work. As Ren said, talking about the Pocket Talker, which are really great devices, and I have missed being able to meet with clients in person over this pandemic and use those. They're surprisingly effective, and the courts have them too. Actually, it's a very similar device that they use at court for clients who have hearing issues. So we will always work to make accommodations for any of our disabled clients, and we're always flexible about pretty much anything when it comes to helping our clients. I'm not sure if anyone talked about like our intake. So our intake has to be, we have to talk with the individual client. They can call with someone else if they kind of need some assistance to make sure that the issue gets across clearly, but we need to talk with them to open a file because we're a law firm, so we have to do conflict checks and confirm that the client actually wants assistance. But we were able to then communicate with whatever support person the client has with verbal authorization, which is often very helpful for our elderly clients. And if that person doesn't have a support system, we often try really hard to kind of get them a support system, refer them out to various services, the areas, agencies on aging. We try and refer them to Maine care services that they might be eligible for, social workers or things like that. We do work with homeless clients, so we'll refer them to like targeted case management. So we really try and make sure that the client's needs are covered while they're working with us. A lot of what we do as well, I think a lot of the stuff for the elder abuse cases, it is sometimes situations of domestic violence, and so there can be safety risks. So that's also something at intake that can be flagged for us. If there is a safety risk in leaving a message and sending mail to someone's house, we flag those at intake, and the staff attorney makes sure to keep the client safe in whatever way is necessary. Another thing that kind of goes along with being aware of the dynamics in some of these abuse situations, we try and get the client alone to speak with them. We're very suspicious of kind of proprietary family members or someone trying to isolate the client or insist that they can't talk with anyone on their own, which is something we see fairly frequently, unfortunately. And so we're always kind of thinking about, is this what the client wants? How can I speak with the client by themselves to confirm? Is someone pressuring the client? And we'll try and kind of suss that out. In terms of kind of the capacity issues that Ren talked about, I think one of the things that we do, which is important, is we do our own determination of capacity for our clients. We'll decide if we feel like the client has capacity to do specific things, because capacity is not like one single thing, like on this day you are incapacitated and you will never have capacity again. It varies depending on what you're looking at, what you're trying to do. There's various levels of capacity for various things, different levels required for a will or a power of attorney or making a healthcare choice. And we'll often see in abuse situations as well that someone will try and really denigrate our client's capacity, say they have dementia, say they're crazy. And, you know, sometimes, okay, maybe they do have some dementia, but we look into the issue ourselves, we take our client's direction, and sometimes our clients, you know, we'll have doctor's assessments as well too in some cases, but I think that's often something that abusers will use to discredit the account of our clients, and it's something that we're aware of and really take into consideration. We actually do another type of case that Ben didn't mention as well. So we don't generally do that much in the probate court, but if someone has filed for guardianship or conservatorship over an adult and they don't want that and they're elderly, they can call and we can help make sure that they get court-appointed counsel if they're not able to arrange that themselves. That's kind of the extent of the services that we do, except when there's, you know, super unique situations sometimes, but generally we help them get court-appointed counsel that they're entitled to fight against guardianship proceeding if that's necessary. But yeah, we see a lot of capacity issues and a lot of situations where those might be leveraged, unfortunately. So I don't know if there was anything else that I wanted to mention, but if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer any.
I wanted to bring up a couple of things to follow up on what Ren and Hillary discussed. One is if you're going to make a referral or encourage a client to call into our helpline, you don't need to have identified the legal issue specifically and confirm that LSE handles it. That's our job. You can identify what the client, if the client is facing what you see as being a situation where they have a legal problem, and then we can figure out if it's something that we can help with or not. And many times it'll be, you know, you may see clients with, let's say, mail from the court that you want to, and you don't know what it means, and they don't know what it means. They could call in and we could try to figure out what's going on for a legal process or otherwise. But you should never feel, you know, restricted in calling the helpline. If you think there's a legal need, you don't need to identify specifically, you know, what type of case it is before calling us. Yeah.
I wanted to add one other thing too is the issue with our financial exploitation cases. Oftentimes, I would say most of the time, the exploitation is occurring with a family member that is taking money from them, the abuser, the exploiter. And we have clients that sometimes suspect that perhaps they're being exploited but don't know. And oftentimes they're reluctant to do anything about it. They're concerned about reporting it criminally because they don't want their family member to go to jail. And one thing that is different in the civil kind of framework and at LSE is that they can contact us even if they suspect exploitation, they don't know it. We can do an investigation. They remain in the driver's seat. So even if we had a viable case to move forward, if they're not comfortable moving forward, we're not going to take that case from them and sue their family member for recovery without their okay. And that really gives our clients a sense of control over their situation where they're in the driver's seat. And then I feel like they will be more comfortable knowing that the process is step by step, slow, and they can stop things at any point. Really helps them feel more comfortable with moving forward if we do have a viable claim than if it were a situation where it was out of their hands and they didn't have that control. They may feel less reluctant and not want to move forward with anything. And sometimes we're able to resolve these situations without having to go to court. We can intervene with the exploitation, stop it, revoke powers of attorney that might be being used by folks to exploit, and at least stop the bleeding and perhaps get some recovery. We have situations sometimes where we get family members to agree to sign a promissory note, pay the money back, all the way through a full litigation in these cases.
So Hillary just raised an important point that we've been talking about the work that we do as staff attorneys, but LSE itself does other things, including the Part D unit. So Hillary, how about you talk a little bit about what the Part D unit does?
Sure. So Medicare Part D is prescription drug coverage with Medicare, and most everyone who's on Medicare has that. If you don't get a Part D policy, you get a penalty eventually. Not an expert on that, but it's available to anyone who gets Medicare Part D. So it's the only part of our services that we don't have an age limit on. So if someone has Part D and they're having trouble getting their meds, that's a place where they can call for free. And and many people are not aware that they can revoke a power of attorney once they've given it, and unfortunately a lot of times the agent doesn't want to tell them or is giving them incorrect information about that. We see that a lot, but we do help people revoke power of attorneys if there's a bad agent, and we try and educate like law enforcement and stuff as well, because often in the past we have like an agent under a power of attorney who's just like stealing, paying their own mortgage or something like that, and explaining that a power of attorney is not a license to steal. Most of them don't have the authority to make gifts or for the agent to use money for their own personal benefit, and so it actually may still be stealing even though there's a power of attorney in place. But these things are complicated, and they don't teach them in school, so people don't know the details of it. So we're a good place to call if you have a bad agent and you're a senior.
And one thing that came up with both Ren and Hillary, which I think is worth reiterating, is I don't know that we've ever had a client call us who has one specific legal need and everything else in their life is going great, right? I don't think that's ever happened. So, whenever you're going to run into people who have an issue that they're dealing with, but there's almost certainly other stuff going on in the background. If they've been financially exploited, they may be behind in their mortgage payments and they may be facing a foreclosure. If they can't get their meds, or they're paying too much for the medications, they may not be paying their rent and they could be facing an eviction, right? There's all these things that can snowball. And so we really encourage people when they are in contact with a client to take a big picture look at what's going on in their life and to find out whether or not there's other needs that need to be met. And sometimes they're not legal needs. Sometimes we make other types of referrals to social workers, healthcare workers, because us solving the problem in the short term without addressing the underlying issues that cause that problem isn't going to actually help the client long term. So, have an open mind when you are interacting with your client and try to see what else is going on in their life that maybe is causing the problem they're facing. And we can't help them directly. We can sometimes find some useful referrals to organizations or people that can provide the help, especially if the issue is really not a legal one, but a health issue or a social issue.
I had something before I forget as well. So there was the question about like online scams and stuff. And I think ransomware is kind of like on a different level, because the Presque Isle Police Department is actually dealing with their own ransomware issue right now, and I don't know if they don't know what they're doing with that either, and then that pipeline paid 5 million ransom. So, but in general, like the kind of like romance scams or some of the other online scams, even though generally all we're doing is referring them to the proper place to make a complaint to authorities who might eventually be able to do something about the scammers because they're generally out of state. But another thing that we often do is see what supports are in place for that person getting help with their finances, and see what we can connect them with, so that if there is a scam again, at least someone will be able to maybe catch it initially. So things we'll look into if we see something like that is, would maybe the Money Minder volunteer program at the local agency on aging to help them, go through their checkbook every month. Could that help? Do they have family members who are trustworthy that they could appoint as agent under power of attorney? Do they have Social Security? Is there any possibility of getting a representative payee who would handle their funds directly? Is that something that they would be opposed to? Things like that. I mean, we never do anything without the client's, understanding and approval, but those will be things we would talk with them about to try and hopefully avoid them getting scammed in the future. But it's tough. Those ones are really tough.
I'll add one more thing, going back to what I had talked about before about clients that may have dementia, and also other health issues that there are, if you can accommodate certain times of day, so particularly with clients who have dementia, some may be good in the morning, others may be better in the afternoon, depending upon their individual situation. But if you can accommodate that, that can make a huge difference, because someone with dementia maybe really, if you can call them and get them at their good time, you will have a really productive conversation. And if you reach them at a bad time, it can be completely ineffective. So I always ask clients, when is the best time of day? When do you feel your best? When will you be comfortable with this? And it also works for any kind of not just dementia, but clients who may have chronic pain, other health issues, and even trauma in their background, particularly if what we have to talk about is particularly stressful for them. They may be better equipped to handle the conversations at particular times of day, on a full stomach or after breakfast, things like that. So something to be sensitive to.
We've talked a lot. What do we have for questions?
I have a question for all three of you, if you could jump in. I wonder if you can sort of think about situations where you've been able to effectively partner either with a victim witness advocate or a trial assistant in a prosecutor's office, or with a community-based advocate in a sexual assault or domestic violence resource center, and just think about sort of what made that partnership effective, just to give our folks tips on how to better partner with you.
I think I would love for Ren and Hillary to talk about any firsthand experience, but we regularly coordinate with domestic violence and sexual assault services, because we need to either set up a safety plan for a client or have them get some additional supports or counseling or other things that we just can't provide. And I think that's really it's a common connection that we make. We also do outreach to those programs so they know who we are and we know who they are before we need to form the relationship. So because sometimes if you already have those connections, it makes it much easier to team up on a case, because you already know each other. You know each other, the things that the programs are capable of doing. And often as importantly, we know what they can't do. So we're not asking them and putting them in a position where they are, being asked to do something that is outside of their scope of work. So we regularly work with those groups, but I'm hoping Hillary and Red have some specifics that they can talk about.
Yeah, I was thinking about one that I had, which was actually, it was a very sad, it was a sexual assault case. And it was a long-time married couple, and it was very traumatic for the client. And I think what worked really well is that I communicated, this was an heuristic, so it was Hope and Justice that referred the case to us, and then kept assisting her throughout the case, and kind of just making clear the separate roles that we're doing and delegating them. And so, like in that case, the client was really anxious and scared about the court day and the court proceeding, and having the advocate there from Hope and Justice who is able to specifically be there next to her the entire time, which I wasn't able to do because I had to go and talk with the husband and you try and talk him into agreeing to a protection order so that we didn't have to have a hearing, and that actually it worked out, and the client moved into actually an assisted living facility with a confidential address. And we were able to get an agreement, and the client didn't have to testify, but she had the support through that entire time, and I could take the time that I needed to try and talk the defendant into what we needed. Yeah. Because we each have our own roles, but I think communicating and taking advantage of the support that these other organizations have is really helpful.
So I have worked in a few courts where we've had domestic violence advocates there as support people for victims, which has been tremendous, kind of like what Hillary was talking about. I had a case where I had a client who was in a domestic violence situation, whose home was being condemned. Our role, LSE's role, was to help delay the condemnation long enough so that our client could get services and help exit this domestic violence situation. And so she was paired with a domestic violence advocate who helped her in the process be able to leave that situation. And we also partnered with APS and then eventually the long-term care ombudsman to help get her placed into an assisted living facility. But all of those agencies partnered together in a really critical, unsafe situation. And if the domestic violence advocate was not involved, I don't think it would have turned out as well as it did, because she really needed that additional support to be able to exit the situation and feel safe doing so. So that was an amazing outcome in that particular case, and one where all signs were pointing to disaster, and it turned out okay.
Thank you. That's great.
I guess I have a question that kind of goes along with that as well. I work at a district attorney's office, and usually what I do with victims is take it out of their hands as far as trying to make that first contact, because for a lot of our victims, that is the hardest part, is to make that first step. So if we make a referral, I usually go to my point of contact, say, here's their information. They gave me the go ahead to give you this information, and here's the basic rundown. Is that something we can do with you all, or does it have to be in their hands, them making the call to you?
You could, thanks for asking. It depends really on the circumstances. I think you could potentially call the helpline and explain who you are and say, I'm going to call back with this person, or I'm going to give this person your number. In order to establish the attorney-client relationship, we need to actually contact and communicate with the client. And part of our policy is we regularly have people calling ostensibly on behalf of a Maine senior who are in fact not acting in their best interest. So they'll call and say, hey, can you help me learn how to initiate a guardianship proceeding? Or can you help me get a power of attorney in place to with this person? And it's actually not what the client wants. So we are always willing to problem solve if there's some reason we need to, but in some way or form, we would need to talk to the client in order to take on any substantive information. And so what we often have people do is call, and then you can even hang up. You can call with the client and say, making this connection, I'm going to let her talk to you, and then you can stay on the phone or not at that point. But we do often need, we always need to have that point of contact with the client, and it can be challenging at times. But if you have a circumstance where it's not working, you can reach out and explain to us what's going on, and maybe we can problem solve it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll try and problem solve as best we can, depending on what the source of the issue is, but we can't reach out, even if we think that they could really use our help. They have to reach out to us for assistance. I will also mention, like, sometimes we'll get letters from people and the helpline will call them back and open a file based on that. We just need to hear from them. But I would say if you think that actually making the contact is going to be a barrier for them, then I would suggest trying like a conference call to get past that initial barrier.
Thank you. And then second part question, do you have somebody that handles tribal courts or has that knowledge to be able to assist those type of?
Okay, I'll answer that. So I am admitted in the Passamaquoddy Tribal Court, though I have not appeared there yet other than to get admitted. But we are open to appearing in tribal court. My coworker, Julie Mallett, who covers Penobscot and Piscataquis, is admitted in the Penobscot Tribal Court, and she has appeared there. She's dealt with at least one financial exploitation case in the tribal court, got someone's house back, I believe. So that was a good outcome. So yes, we would handle that as well. So I won't say we're the most experienced in it.
Do we have any other questions from folks? And any other comments from our panel, other things you've thought of that people should know?
No, we really appreciate everyone taking the time today. I think I mentioned we get so many calls a year, and we know we are barely scratching the surface of folks who could benefit from our help. So we really want to encourage people to help anyone who may benefit from our services to call in and connect with us, because we're doing outreach all the time, because we know the folks who are most in need are often the ones who are not on our radar, and we really want to figure out a way to connect with them.
That's great. There was a quick question in the chat about whether you work with APS in which is Adult Protective Services in exploitation cases, and yes, definitely there's collaboration there. So I just wanted to make sure that that made it out of the chat into the conversation. Otherwise,
and I'll just note
Yeah,
too, sometimes our clients have a justified or unjustified worry about having APS have anything to do with them. And so we don't reach out to APS unless our client wants us to. And that's really important, because a lot of our clients are very worried about having someone come in and assess where they're living or how they're living or what they're doing, and have any kind of loss of freedom. So we do very regularly work with APS, and it's based on what our client directs us to do.
great. So Ben and Hillary and Ren, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hope this kicks off a whole bunch of referrals and opportunities to partner and work together on cases. And for those who are attending today, this will be recorded and we'll send this around so that you're able to share it with colleagues too. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.